Welcome to this presentation on layered MAC, which is an energy protected and efficient protocol for wireless sensor networks. My name is Ekereuke Udoh and I co-authored this paper with Vladimir Getov. So moving on to the content of this presentation, we would first begin with the background of the project and then move on to the related work, and then proceed to the actual protocol development and what it involved. And we would then discuss the simulation results and finally talk about the future work and conclude the presentation. In terms of the background, this project is focused specifically on wireless sensor networks. Now, the reason for wireless sensor networks is the resource-constrained nature of the sensors on those networks. These sensors are usually battery-powered. Now, the question is, why not other alternative sources of energy? This is because these sensors are usually deployed in remote locations. So one example could be sensors can be deployed underwater to help with detecting debris from maybe a plane crash or something. Sensors can be deployed on a bridge in order to measure to keep track or keep an eye on the strength of the bridge, so that if there's a crack, these sensors can transmit all information to the head office or base station. So usually the use cases of the sensors means that these sensors would operate mainly on batteries. And considering that we're looking into the energy efficiency, the radio is known to be the highest source of energy consumption in a wireless sensor. So that's the background. Now, within wireless sensor networks, there is a specific kind of attack which was very interesting, and that takes us to the next point or slide, which is denial of sleep attacks. Now, the typical sensor, which is battery powered, the batteries last for around 3.5 years, after which the entire sensor needs to be replaced. Now, in order for these sensors to last for 3.5 years, they go into sleep mode when they are idle, just like a laptop would go into sleep mode when not in use, in order to save energy. Now, the denial of sleep attack, the goal is to stop the sensors from sleeping, thereby reducing their lifespan from 3.5 years to 3 days, which is a very significant loss of energy and lifespan. Now, the attack is focused on the radio, and because it's wireless, then there is more vulnerability there in terms of access to the radio, which then leads us to the MAC layer. The MAC layer is media access control, which controls access to the radio. And so that logically becomes the area we have now decided to look into the research, which explains why we created a MAC layer protocol called layered MAC. Now, the denial of sleep attacks, there are different strategies and techniques as to how these attacks are carried out. One of them is a sleep deprivation attack. There is barrage attacks, which a barrage of packets are sent, are flooded. There's synchronization attacks. There's replay attacks. There is collision attacks, and there is broadcast attacks. So having an idea of the technique or the strategy as to how the denial of sleep attack is carried out gives us more perspective as to how to curb this issue or this attack. That led us to looking at some related work, which we looked at protocols, we looked at schemes, we looked at models. And in terms of protocols, the key ones that stood out were GMAC, which is Gateway MAC, and Zero Knowledge Protocol. Now, GMAC focused on using clustering as a way of saving energy. So what we found about these protocols is, in terms of the schemes, they were focused more on the security aspects. So we hardly found any protocol that intentionally combines energy efficiency and security, because the denial of sleep attack is an attack on energy and also has a security context to it. So it's a two-pronged approach which we decided to follow, where we would look at energy efficiency as well as security. Now, this protocol schemes and models were focused on either one of them and not both. And so therefore we decided to think about a methodology as to how we would develop this protocol. So first of all, we looked at test cases as to what exactly we would be testing for in order to help improve energy efficiency. And so therefore that led us to look at the sources of energy loss in sensors. And we found out that they can be categorized into four. The first one is energy can be lost through collision, because when there's a collision there is data loss, and that would require the packets to be resent. Control overhead is another source of energy loss. Sometimes when there is too much information with regards to the control packets, the size of data therefore has an impact on the energy consumption. The third is idle listening, where when sensors are idle, they listen to the medium to see if there's any message, or to know when it's time for them to send their messages. So if the scheduling is not properly done or planned in the protocol, energy can be lost through idle listening. And the last one is overhearing, where a packet loses energy because it's overhearing a message that was meant for another node or sensor. So energy can be lost from that. So these are the four ways, and from an energy point of view. But then on the right side, we came up with this framework which takes into consideration virtual clustering, which is not done physically but done virtually by virtue of calculating the distance between the nodes. And there's authentication, which focuses on the security side. There's also duty cycling. Duty cycling has to do with the amount of time the node is awake versus the amount of time the node goes to sleep. And that has to be scheduled properly so as to save energy. But then the extra layer to that is adaptive duty cycling, which is, most protocols usually have duty cycling which is fixed. But then sometimes the network traffic evolves, and it's better, it can be more energy efficient if there is an adaptive way where the duty cycle adjusts automatically based on the traffic. So in times where there is less traffic, the sensors will sleep more, but in times where there is more traffic, then they would have to probably sleep less. The idea there is not to ensure energy efficiency at the cost of throughput. So there has to be a balance. So while we want energy efficiency, we also want to make sure there is very good level of throughput where packets are delivered. There's also cluster level broadcast, which also saves energy because you don't have to broadcast to all the nodes, but only to those within your cluster, which therefore can save energy. There's a cluster head rotation, which is also a security measure as well as energy, because rotating the cluster heads allows the energy usage to be distributed kind of evenly, and also prevents, from a security point of view, also helps with more randomness. And we have finally the RSSI and LQI. The RSSI is received signal strength indicator. The LQI is link quality indicator. These can be used to detect anomalies or via pattern recognition to help detect when there is a potential denial of sleep attack or something odd is happening. So after deciding on our methodology, we then went on to do a requirements analysis, and we've used MOSCAL, which is a prioritization technique, which stands for must have, should have, could have, and won't have. This helps us prioritize the requirements. The must have, you can see that the sync node should be able to get the RSSI and LQI values of every sensor it receives data from. Each node should know how far it is from the sync node and use that to decide who becomes a cluster head. So there is a measurement of distance here in order to help detect, decide on cluster heads. The protocol should be able to adjust the duty cycle at runtime based on the traffic, so adaptive duty cycling. The protocol should allow cluster heads to be appointed and rotated at intervals if need be. Again, for security, cluster head rotation. And the protocol should allow for a node to be isolated from the network when it has been discovered to be an attacker node. So there is also provision for when there's an attack, what should be done. So there is a technique for isolation of that node in order to still allow the rest of the network to function. So that is also an important aspect. In terms of the should haves, the nodes should be able to find the least expensive route, so there should be routing also considered, but that's a should have. And cluster heads should also be able to communicate using code division multiple access, which is a form of carrier sense CSMA, to help reduce the level of collisions. And one of the could have, which we kind of pushed to future work, is to see how machine learning can be used to enhance denial of sleep attack detection. And the last category of the MOSCAL is will not have, which is, we are pointing out here that this research is based on the constraint that the sensors are battery powered and do not have access to other sources of energy. In terms of algorithm design, for each sensor, the sensor has to go through 4 stages, which is the startup stage, the carrier sensing stage, the transmit stage, and the receive stage. The startup stage is the setup, where things like deciding on the cluster heads, all of that is done, the duty cycling. The carrier sense stage is sensing the medium to decide on when to send the message. The transmit stage is sending the message. The receive stage is when you receive a message. So all of this was taken into consideration when working on the protocol. Now, in terms of doing the simulations and looking at the performance of the protocol, we looked at the energy consumed initially and tried to see this across different network scenarios. One is a 40-meter bridge, a 200-meter bridge, and a layered and a 1,000-meter bridge. And we could see here that there's a correlation between direct proportion between the duty cycle and the consumed energy. So the higher the duty cycle, the higher the energy consumed. We then went on to compare the layered MAC with other protocols in terms of energy consumption. And as we can see here, layered MAC appears to consume more energy than the other protocols in all three network scenarios. However, if you remember, we said the goal is to improve energy efficiency, but not at the cost of throughput. So we then go on to measure the reception, the reception at the sink, which has to do with throughput, and we see here that there is a significant difference between the throughput of layered MAC, which is positive, way higher than that of TMAC and SMAC, which means overall layered MAC is more energy efficient when you take into consideration the throughput. So we then also not just look at the energy, but also look at the protocol under attack, and we see that the layered MAC performs significantly better than SMAC and slightly better than TMAC due to the framework where we took into consideration virtual clustering, the RSSI, LQI, and different aspects, including the cluster head rotation. And all of that has an impact on how well the protocol deals with or responds under attack. We can see that the throughput still stays significantly higher than the other two because of the isolation mechanism when there is an attack. To conclude this work, we can see here that one of the benefits of the new protocol is its multi-layered approach, which we saw in the methodology section, and the combination of virtual clustering, authentication, RSSI and LQI measurement, and that consciousness of both security as well as energy efficiency, we bring those together. And in terms of future work, machine learning techniques could be explored, and how machine learning can be used to help in further detecting denial of sleep attacks and even further enhance energy efficiency and security. Thank you for listening.